parents kicked me out because of my sister's pregnancy. Now, they're reaching out a year later to mend things, but I've moved on. My parents kicked me, 19F, out of my house almost a year ago, just a few weeks after turning 18. That wasn't even the worst part. It happened during finals week in high school, and I had nowhere to go. Fortunately, I have good friends since my best friend and her parents took me in, and I am quite grateful to them. My parents kicked me out because my older sister became pregnant, and they thought she needed to move back home so she could be well cared for. She is not even my whole biological sister. She is a half-sister. My mother had been dating my stepfather, Jacob, while they were in college, and she became pregnant a few months before graduation. However, she was too young at the time and chose not to marry him. It was only a fling, and they split up. Jacob, on the other hand, remained determined to be a father, so they co-parented Sasha, my half-sister, and maintained contact. When Sasha was 3, my mother met my biological father. They dated for 2 years before marrying. 1 year into their marriage, she became pregnant with me. However, my father was not prepared and wanted to end the pregnancy. My mother refused, and they separated ways. After my father abandoned my pregnant mother, she severed all relations with him and his family before reconciling with Jacob. My father had passed away by the time I was born, and my mother and Jacob reared me. They married a few years after her divorce from my father was finalized, but I never regarded Jacob as a family member because he never treated me as such. I guess Jacob reunited with my mother while she was pregnant with me because he still loved her and wanted to be on her good side. But to him, I was always a burden. He'd been frigid to me since I was a child, and Sasha treated me similarly. While I got along well with my mother, I never developed a bond with Jacob or Sasha, despite the fact that we lived as a family. They always treated me as an outsider. My mother has always claimed to love me as much as they do, but I've never felt that way. She never acknowledged our estrangement, and despite my attempts to connect with them when I was younger, I was always rejected. As I grew older, I saw what was going on and gave up on pursuing a relationship with Jacob and Sasha. I shouldn't have been surprised when they kicked me out because Sasha was expecting and wanted to move back in. However, it came as a shock. I should have known that Sasha would always be Jacob's priority, no matter how much older she was than me. Still, I hoped my mother would defend me, but she didn't. Sasha approached me around a year ago, just 2 days before finals week, and informed me that she was pregnant. She was 24 at the time, which made her 6 years older than me. Despite this, my parents decided to kick me out to create a place for her and help her save money. Sasha and her boyfriend, who had been together since high school, lived in a little apartment not far from our house. I thought it was appropriate for her to remain there, but she wanted to return home. She didn't feel safe remaining in the apartment alone because she works from home and her partner has to travel for work on occasion. She wanted to move back in with her parents while pregnant to avoid being alone and save money on rent. Her boyfriend was also planning to move in with her at our apartment. So Sasha and my parents decided she would return home. That would have been okay with me, but they informed me I had to vacate my room for a few months since they required it for her. Sasha already had a room in our house, but after she left for college, Jacob converted it into an office. My parents informed me she couldn't stay in the living room, therefore the only option was for me to give up my room. They asked that I think of it as a sacrifice for my family. I might not have been as upset if they hadn't had this chat with me immediately before my first exam. I was already stressed from preparing for tests and I had a lot of exams coming up in the next 2 weeks. They only worried about Sasha and her pregnancy. I put my foot down and told them I wasn't leaving because Sasha had never treated me like family, so I didn't need to make any sacrifices for her. My parents attempted to reason with me, but I believed they were being unreasonable, and we argued until they snapped. Jacob told me I had to leave by the end of the week or I'd be tossed out, and no one could stop him because I was an adult. He stated that he had the right to decide whether or not I may stay at his place. I expected my mother to protect me, but instead she sided with Jacob. She stated they needed to make room for their real grandkids, and didn't have the time or energy to argue with me about it. She told me to do as I was told. My mom's use of the word real grandkids reaffirmed what I had already felt and known for years. My mom, Sasha, and Jacob were their own little family, and I had always been an outsider. I was really unhappy and decided to begin packing my things right away, oblivious to the fact that I had an exam the following day. They didn't even try to stop me as I departed, revealing where their priorities lay. I ended up on my best friend's doorstep. When I explained everything to her and her parents, they invited me to stay with them as long as I wanted. Many of you may wonder why I didn't ask for support from family members, but I don't know any. Jacob's family is exactly like him. They don't like me at all, and I knew addressing them would be futile. They would do everything they could to avoid helping me. My mother's side of the family is also unfamiliar to me. Apparently, her parents and the rest of the family abandoned her when she became pregnant with Sasha. They wanted her to concentrate on her studies and did not want her to continue with the pregnancy because she was too young. She did it anyhow, and no one has spoken to her since. They weren't even present for her wedding to my father, nor for Sasha's or my birth, as she told me. So since I had no relatives, I turned to my pals. After I was kicked out and moved in with my best friend and her family, I was continually expecting my mother to contact me. I had no such expectations of Jacob or Sasha because I knew they didn't care about me and were probably relieved I left because I never fit into their perfect family. What really hurt me was that my mother didn't contact me. After a few months, I gave up hope completely. A full year has passed since then, and I've heard from a few people that Sasha gave birth a few months back. She and her boyfriend have been sharing how pleased they are to be parents to their baby. The three of them are still living with my parents, perhaps to save money on rent. I honestly couldn't care less about any of it. I've been working on improving my own life. After I graduated from high school, I needed to figure out how to get to college. With little contact with my parents, I also lacked money. My best friend's parents had graciously allowed me to live rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to pay for my schooling, especially since they had 2 children of their own. I was anxious, but fortunately, I had applied for several scholarships. Because I'm a good student, I was able to obtain a scholarship from one of the institutions I applied to. It wasn't my first or even second choice, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to save money. Sasha already had a room in our house, but after she left for college, Jacob converted it into an office. My parents informed me that she could not stay in the living room, so the only logical choice was for me to give up my room. They begged me to consider it a sacrifice for my family. If they hadn't told me this just before my first exam, I wouldn't have been so unhappy. I was already nervous about studying for my examinations, which were due in the following 2 weeks, but they seemed to be more concerned with Sasha and her pregnancy. I put my foot down and told them I wasn't leaving since Sasha had never treated me like family, so I didn't feel obligated to make any sacrifices for her. My parents attempted to reason with me, but I believed they were being unreasonable, and we argued until they snapped. Jacob told me that I had to go by the end of the week or I would be tossed out because I was legally an adult and he had the right to decide whether I stayed in his house or not. I expected my mother to protect me, but she sided with Jacob. She explained that they needed to make room for their real grandkids, and did not have the time or energy to argue with me about it. Hearing her refer to Sasha's children as real grandkids, reinforced what I had assumed for years. My mother, Sasha, and Jacob had their own small family, and I had always been the outsider. I was so unhappy that I started packing my things right away, ignoring the fact that I had a test the next day. They didn't even try to stop me as I departed, revealing where their priorities lay. I landed up at my best friend's house, and after explaining everything to her and her parents, they invited me to stay with them as long as I needed. You might wonder why I didn't ask other family members for assistance, but I don't really have any. Jacob's family dislikes me, so I knew it would be fruitless to seek assistance. I never knew anyone on my mother's side of the family. My mother always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, her family cut her off because they wanted her to focus on her studies. They didn't want her to get pregnant since she was too young, but she did anyway, and no one has spoken to her since. They weren't even present for her wedding to my father, let alone either of our births, according to her. So I didn't think I had any relatives to turn to, so I went to my pals instead. After I was kicked out and moved in with my best friend and her family, I kept expecting my mother to contact me. I had no such expectations of Jacob or Sasha, as they clearly didn't care about me and were probably relieved that I had left. What pained me the most was that my mother did not reach out at all. After a few months, I gave up hope completely. It has been a year since then. I found out from friends that Sasha had given birth a few months ago and that she and her boyfriend have been posting about their new life as delighted parents. They are still living with my parents, probably to economize on rent. I honestly don't care about any of that stuff anymore. I've been working on improving my own life. After graduating from high school, I needed to figure out how to get to college. It wasn't easy without having my parents' financial assistance. My best friend's parents were generous enough to let me live rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to pay for my tuition, especially since they had 2 children of their own. I was apprehensive, but thankfully, I had applied for numerous scholarships, and because I was a brilliant student, I was awarded one. It was not my first or even second choice of education, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to save money. The scholarship covered 60% of my tuition. So I chose to get a student loan alongside my closest friends' parents as co-signers. I promised them that they wouldn't have to worry about repaying the debt because I would work while studying and pay it off myself. That is what I have been doing. It's been difficult, but knowing I'm succeeding on my own is wonderful. I hadn't heard from my family in a year and I wasn't expecting them to seek out. Surprisingly, approximately a week ago, my mother emailed me and asked me to come home for the weekend. She claimed she missed me, as did Jacob and Sasha, and they wanted to reconcile with me. She stated they were aware they had treated me unfairly. In the email, my mother was unusually charming, faking sincerity. Call it gut instinct, but I sensed something was wrong and did not answer. A few days later, she wrote another email, which I disregarded as well, despite my need to find out what was going on. I realized there had to be another reason. It was improbable they would suddenly feel sorry a year after kicking me out. It looked overly convenient. I received my response 2 days ago, when my maternal grandparents contacted me. I was surprised they were able to contact me, as I was certain my parents had not given them my information. They explained that they had to inquire around and eventually obtained my phone number from one of my high school acquaintances, who trusted them enough to disclose it. It turned out to be my best buddy, and I'm glad she didn't tell me since it was a welcome surprise. My grandparents called, and I couldn't believe it was them. I've never known them, seen them, or heard their voices. I was hesitant at first, but then they FaceTimed me and showed me old photo albums of my mother from her childhood and adolescent years. That's when I started to believe they were my grandparents. We all got rather emotional. I'm not sure why, but I just did. We began talking, and I shared details about my life. I tried to avoid talking about my parents, but it was pointless because they already knew everything. They claimed that one of the main reasons they had not contacted me before was because of my parents. They recently discovered the truth, which prompted them to contact us. I was perplexed. My mother had always told me that when she became pregnant with Sasha, my grandparents cut her off. That was everything I knew. However, there was more to the story. My grandparents emphasized that they were not opposed to my mother having Sasha. Rather, they opposed her connection with Jacob. My mother had lied about her parents to safeguard Jacob's reputation. My grandparents had been supportive of her pregnancy and informed her she had the freedom to choose. However, they did not approve of Jacob because he was a well-known addict. They had all grown up in the same area, attended the same high school, and even went to the same college, so my grandparents were well aware of Jacob's background. They promised my mother that they would financially assist her during and after the pregnancy, but only if she broke up with Jacob. They didn't want him to influence her. After much thinking, my mother ended their relationship because Jacob couldn't get his life in order. My grandparents took complete custody of Sasha once she was born, and Jacob had only supervised visitation privileges for the first few years. Jacob eventually finished his degree and became clean, but he relapsed every several months, so my grandparents never trusted him completely. They introduced my mother to my father, who is the son of a family friend. After a few years of seeing one another on and off, my mother married him because she had given up hope that Jacob would ever recover. But it appears she has never completely moved on from Jacob. A year into her marriage, she began an affair with him and became pregnant again. At that time, my mother had to tell my father about the affair since she couldn't picture her life without Jacob. Now that she was pregnant, she needed to tell him the truth. Her infidelity was the reason she got a divorce from my father and later married Jacob. So everything Mom said about my father's opposition to having me was a lie. After I was born, many paternity tests were performed, and I was happily not Jacob's child. I was, in fact, my biological father's daughter, which was a relief because I had no desire to be Jacob's biological daughter. My father even had partial custody of me for a period, although I scarcely remember it because it was so long ago. Unfortunately, my biological father died in a vehicle accident when I was 7 months old, allowing my mother to lie to me for the remainder of my life. My father's side of the family refused to have anything to do with me after his death, which was convenient for my mother. My grandparents were really disturbed when they discovered my mother was having an affair with Jacob. They gave her another ultimatum. She could either shut Jacob out of her life completely and focus on her marriage with my father, or she could get a divorce and never speak to them again. This time, my mother chose Jacob because he had been clean for about a year, longer than any of his previous stints. That was the final major disagreement my mother had with her parents. My mother was still pregnant at the time, and they did not communicate again until after my birth. My grandparents ultimately softened and decided to contact her so they could meet me, but Jacob refused to play along and form a happy family with them because of how they had treated him. So my mother turned down their attempts to reunite. My grandparents did not give up, however. They attempted to contact my mother every several months, but she never accepted them back into her life. This continued on for years until Jacob and my mother had financial difficulties and were unable to pay their rent. My mother had no one else to turn to, So she contacted her parents. In a great gesture, my grandparents gave her a house, hoping that it would bring them closer together. It was about 6 years ago when my family moved into our new home. It was a great improvement over the apartment we used to live in. I'd often wondered how my parents could afford such a wonderful property in such a desirable neighborhood, given that my mother was a receptionist and Jacob worked in sales. His company had been failing, so it seemed unlikely that they could afford it. I now realize that was all thanks to my grandparents. Despite this, my parents, being the ungrateful people they are, did not attempt to repair their relationship with my grandparents. Both my mother and Jacob were aware that my grandparents had paid for the house, but my mother insisted that they were not ready to reconnect and needed time to think about it. My grandparents, being naive, gave them room for a few months, but when my mother did not respond, they tried again. She kept claiming that she needed more time. This went on for years, and my grandparents eventually admitted that perhaps it wasn't meant to be. They were getting older and told me how humiliating it was to continually attempting to contact their daughter only to be denied each time. They finally admitted to my mother that they understood why she no longer wanted to be around them and regretted themselves for not being gentler in the past. The only thing they wanted was that my mother continue to send photos of our family so that they knew we were doing fine. Surprisingly, my mother agreed, and for the past few years, that was how my grandparents stayed in touch, which was quite sad. They told me everything, and I burst into tears. I had always thought of them as villains, but that was not the case. Now, as for how they discovered the truth. My grandfather just had a health scare with heart problems, and he and my grandma realized they couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Because they weren't getting any younger, they wanted to make one final attempt to reconcile with the family before passing away. They stopped by my mother's house a few weeks ago, which is technically still theirs because they paid for it and their names are on the deed. When they came, my mother had no choice but to welcome and entertain them. They discovered they were great-grandparents when Sasha had her children. But when they asked about me, my parents became really uneasy and had no idea what to say. So they informed my grandparents that I was away at college and that it might not be a good time to contact me because I was in a vulnerable state due to examinations. They couldn't even come up with a false college name, which led my grandparents to suspect something was up. They had a gut feeling that my parents had made a mistake, so they left the house to speak with our neighbors. That is how they discovered that I had not been living with my parents for the past year after being kicked out. The neighbors didn't know why, but their son, who went to school with me, informed my grandparents that I had been staying with my closest friend's family for a while, and they could know more. That's how my grandparents got in touch with my best buddy, and they eventually found out what happened to me. Naturally, they were furious when they discovered the truth. My grandparents informed my mother that she and her family would need to evacuate the house in order to make room for their only real grandchild. It was the epitome of retaliation, using the identical things my parents had used to me. My best friend ensured that my grandparents knew just how to press that nerve. It now became clear why my parents were attempting to reach out and make amends. They were going to lose their home. My grandparents waited a few days to approach me after learning everything because they were concerned about how I would respond. They eventually decided to go forward with it since they had wasted so many years worrying about how my mother would respond, and they wanted to do the right thing now. However, my grandparents also wanted to give me the freedom to choose what I wanted. They told me that if I wanted to give my family another chance, they could continue to live in the house. But if I wanted them to leave, that is what would happen. Apparently, when they came, no one in the family seemed pleased to see them, and I was the only one who appeared truly interested in developing a relationship with them. My grandparents refused to be taken for fools anymore, so I had to decide whether I wanted my parents to have a home or not. If I'm being honest, I suppose I want them tossed out, but that sounds a little harsh. I'm not sure whether that's the appropriate thing to do. What if I told my grandparents I wanted to kick my family out? Update 1. Hello, first and foremost, thank you for all of your encouraging words. It means everything to me, and I appreciate it more than I can express. Regarding my decision, I've concluded that I do want my family to leave that house. I told my grandparents a few days ago, and now they're evicting my family. Of course, there's a lot of legal stuff involved, which my grandparents say I don't need to worry about. My parents have also been emotionally manipulative, particularly Sasha, but my grandparents are impervious to it. After speaking with me, they learned about all the falsehoods my mother had been spreading and how she had poisoned their grandchildren against them. They have no more sympathy for my parents. To be honest, Sasha and her partner are working grown-ups, so I'm confident they'll find something out, just like millions of others. The same applies for my parents. I don't feel guilty about any of it. After all, they didn't feel horrible about kicking me out, knowing I was just 18 and still in school. Despite this, I was able to perform well academically, even though it occurred just before my exams. I urged my grandparents not to worry about my college tuition, but they insisted on handling the student loan I had taken out. They also apologized for not being present for me sooner. We have a lot to talk about and make up for, but everything is going great right now. Update 2. Hello, my grandparents began evicting my family a few weeks back, and they have till the end of next month to depart. My mother is not pleased about it. She felt compelled to inform me, writing an email a few weeks ago in an attempt to regain my trust and heal things, most likely so her parents wouldn't kick her out. The email was quite different from the one I had received before. This one was full of swear words, saying she wished she hadn't given birth to me. She even said she wishes I had been in the vehicle accident with my father, so we might both have died. So that's my mom for you. But it no longer bothers me since, to me, she is not family. If I'm being honest, my only family now consists of my grandparents, my best friend, her parents, and a few relatives whom my grandparents are introducing me to. My mother broke them off long ago since she didn't want anything to do with her family. It's an unusual scenario, but I'm adjusting. Update 3. Hello, the holidays have just begun, and I'm back home in my old house. It feels strange to be here, but my grandparents have been living in the house since my family departed, and they've done an excellent job of renovating it. Even my room seems like home again. We'll be throwing a Thanksgiving dinner shortly, and we've invited some family members, my best friend, and her parents. I feel like my life is finally getting back on track. I'm very happy, and I wish I could stay this way forever. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.